Hey there, Horizon Walkers.
Welcome to another flashlight.
This week, we'll be learning about TSR, the company that published Dungeons & Dragons before Wizards of the Coast.
Let's roll initiative.
Yeah, so nowadays, when we think about like the company behind Dungeons & Dragons, right, we think of like WotC, Wizards of the Coast, you know, or Hasbro, their multi-billion-dollar publicly traded S&P 500 corporate overlords. And we're going to be talking a lot more about Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro in the remainder of the season. But before WotC, there was Tactical Studies Rules Incorporated. And this is the company founded by Gary Gygax and Don Kay and all those guys at the game store in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And like it is kind of a cool story because these are like hobbyists, right?
Yeah.
They're having fun, they're amateurs learning as they go, very enthusiastic, and they make a thing that just blows up, right? They're making a game that everyone wants to play and that succeeds very quickly in ways they probably didn't initially expect. And like that's all we could ever hope for any of our creative projects. But as we'll see again later in the season, actually, capitalism wants us to, pursue perpetual growth, right? And they had this bread and butter of this like incredibly successful tabletop system, but they just kept trying to branch out into other things and didn't always go well. And so as we go through the season, or as we go through this episode, right, one thing that we're going to talk a lot about in this episode is corporate finance. Right? And I love stories about companies collapsing and stock options and factoring contracts. Right? Yeah, this is a TTRPG podcast. It is not a business history podcast. So Reilly and I are sitting across from each other in the studio.
Yes.
And Reilly has a sword.
I do. It is... Let me go grab it.
It's right there.
Where'd my sword go?
It's right there.
Oh. All right. I have my samurai sword.
It is a pretty cool sword.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the plan is, if I'm straying too far off topic into the weeds of corporate finance, Reilly will menace me with the sword. Like that. And if I persist, Reilly will attack me with the sword. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Great. We'll also play a game about attacking each other with swords later on that we'll implement dice-wise, not with an actual sword.
Okay.
Yeah. Just want to make sure that we keep the jig on track. Brief history. TSR was founded by Gary Gygax and Don Kay in 1972.
All right.
They published D&D. They ran this gaming convention, Gen Con, that is still probably the biggest tabletop gaming convention in the world.
Wow.
And they published a bunch of other games. One of those games is an espionage TTRPG called Top Secret. Ooh. Allegedly, it was so realistic that the FBI visited the TSR offices about like a purported assassination plot.
Yeah.
From these ultra realistic game books. This is like...
That sounds reasonable.
Well, it's part of like the canonical history of like TSR and all these officially corporate sanctioned, timelines. Really hard to find any contemporary evidence. You think there would have been newspaper articles at the time or something, right? But I can't find any. Anyway, that sword fighting game I mentioned earlier that we're going to play, we're going to play a little bit of Top Secret later on.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
oh
yeah.
my gosh.
But yeah, look, within a decade, TSR was one of the 100 fastest growing private companies in the United States.
Really?
Yes. Inc. magazine had published a list every year at the time, and TSR was like, this company was growing just incredibly quickly, and like, they were spending money on everything happening in Lake Geneva.
Give me some numbers. Jake is pulling up. Do you have a spreadsheet for this?
I don't. I thought that I was supposed to avoid numbers for this one. Do you want?
That's why. Should I give you the sword? Am I too excited about finances?
I didn't know you wanted to talk about finances this much. I sincerely did not expect this lust for numbers from Reilly.
I mean, I love dice with numbers. I love reports with numbers. And I love graphs that go up and to the right.
I also love graphs that go up and to the right. Yeah, so by 1981, TSR had revenues of almost $13 million and a payroll of 130. So 9 years after they started, they had, as a hobbyist game,
Yeah.
they had 130 people working under them.
That's wild.
Yeah, and like they were buying every business in town.
Yeah.
They raised a shipwreck from Lake Geneva. I don't know why. There's like,
Wait, is this documented as well? There's got to be a local newspaper that says
did they raise the shipwreck? Yes.
Okay.
Yes. They basically, like, in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, this was like this huge thriving business that had kind of come out of nowhere in a hobby space where, like, nowadays, you know, people monetize their hobbies. That's normal.
Sure, yeah.
At the time, there weren't a lot of companies like this that grew out of hobbies to very quickly become multi-million-dollar businesses. Right?
Yeah.
It was a little bit rarer, and this was just a huge success. People loved Dungeons and Dragons and all these other games they were making.
How many like books did they have? Do you have the numbers on how expensive like the starting set?
So the starting set in today's dollars is actually not that bad. It would come out to about $50 today.
Right, but that's basically a magazine and some dice.
That
some figurines.
That is the books, right?
Yeah.
You'd pay more than that. You pay like $20 in today's dollars for the dice.
Okay.
And I don't know how much you pay for the little minifigs. As we talked about last week, they had some extremely bargain bin minifigs in the original.
You know what? I'm just hearing big margins, you know?
Well, we'll actually get into that. Because yeah, this is a really profitable business, absolutely. But, you know, they started out without a lot of capital, right? They started the whole business with $2,400 in startup costs. And it became a multi-million-dollar business, and
In less than 10 years.
in less than 10 years. And so, despite the fact that they were making a pretty successful product in this era, they really were just strapped for capital at all times, right? And so they used what were called factoring arrangements, where basically they would get the game store to pre-order the books at the start of the year, and then they got short-term loans from banks to cover the cost of making the books, publishing, and distributing them. And then when the game store sold them, they would give money to TSR, and TSR would give money, Reilly's glancing at the sword, TSR would give money to the bank with 18% interest.
Whoa, 18% interest in 1970, early 70s.
This is late 70s at this point, when
late
interest
70s,
rates are
okay.
going up, right?
Right.
This is the era of like,
Yeah.
you know, hyperinflation, the whip inflation now, buttons, all that
Yeah.
stuff. And like, this locked the company into just a cycle of debt where they always had to have these loans going on to pay
Right.
for their next book to come out.
Yes.
And the way that they would pay that is issuing like the next year's book. And it also meant they couldn't make any changes midstream because they got these loans out at the beginning of the calendar year.
Yeah.
And that was their money for the year.
How many books would they try to publish a year?
They couldn't choose to publish more than like one book a year because they had in a given game line, because they had to pay for everything with these loans,
Right.
and they had to be pretty certain that they would be able to make the money back later on.
Yeah.
Now, this also gave them an incentive if they were really short on cash to overproduce books, because then they can get more money from the bank. And yeah, this kind of factoring arrangement, you know, I think was a symptom of the fact that they just didn't have a lot of cash to start with. And this is a hobby business that grew up into this big, thriving enterprise. You know, I will say things weren't like entirely rosy in this era. They had like a fairly wild idea of how IP law worked. They ended up cutting Dave Arneson out from royalties. They used like Edgar Rice Burroughs and J.R.R. Tolkien content kind of indiscriminately until lawyers materialized around them. And they tried to cease and desist any third-party supplements. So they were being sued by the estates of these authors, and they were also suing anyone. Yeah. Gary Gygax ended up in Hollywood in this era, trying to get D&D TV and movies made.
Ooh, Hollywood Gary.
I mean, yeah, like there's that perpetual growth, right?
Yeah.
Why stick with the one thing? We can branch out. There was eventually a Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, but like no huge success.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they're selling a lot of these books, but they also are facing these very high interest rates on these factoring arrangements to produce all their work. And because of the way that the company, was set up with this group of friends and people who participated in these hobbies together, they had some kind of unconventional stock options arrangements where the principals in the company could put in money to buy new stock in huge quantities. Right?
Okay.
So they all had the options to purchase like enough shares to seize back control from each other just by putting in a few $100s. And I imagine that the initial goal was like, hey, we're all going to put in money periodically over time.
Right.
But the way these contracts were written, Gary Gygax used his options and a family member's options to take majority control of the company and clear out anyone who disagreed with them.
Yeah.
And then some of the investors exercised their options to take back majority control of the company.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, again, this is one of these arrangements that happens because it starts out as a hobby-based business.
Right.
That is not how, if you start from the ground up, conventional profit-making company, you don't allow people to jump scare, exercise options, now I'm in charge, right? That is not a system that you'd say from first principles, hey, you know how we're going to make a lot of money. That's a system you come up with when you're starting a hobby business with friends.
Your friends.
Yeah. And then that business becomes like...
It becomes D&D.
It becomes D&D, yeah. And you have hundreds of people working under you, and there's like big money involved. So when those other investors, other than Gary Gygax, used their options to take back majority control of the company, they put it in the hands of Lorraine Williams, who actually had like business management experience.
Okay.
And who kind of came in with the lens of like, I'm not a hobbyist. I'm not someone who came up through this game world. I'm someone who wants this company to, succeed and thrive over time.
I'm a business
person, yeah. And so in the late 80s and early 90s, under Williams, D&D got like some of what we think of now as the really iconic settings, right? The Forgotten Realms, Ravenloft, Spelljammer. They produced a really successful war game called The Hunt for Red October.
Ooh.
You know The Hunt for Red October, like the movie?
The movie, yeah.
Yeah. This is a war game kind of about that exact scenario.
Amazing.
It did really well. Unfortunately for the success of that game, fortunately for the real world, the Cold War ended very shortly thereafter. And so the market, and there was a brief period there where there really was that market for these Cold War themed games, and then that market kind of subsided.
Yeah.
Again, during this era, they're once again trying to branch out.
Right.
And
Expansion. Infinite growth. And they're really trying to make like D&D novelization tie-ins. There's more lawsuits involved. They're already just ripping off books, though. Well, what's the D&D novel? It's Lord of the Rings.
I mean, no, they actually had real fantasy authors writing.
Okay.
These are high effort went into these books, and they didn't succeed monetarily in the way that I think the company wanted.
People wanted to play the game and not read it.
It seemed like it, yeah. And
that's the core of D&D and tabletop gaming, is the interactivity of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's a lot of fantasy novels and other media that we could consume.
Yeah.
But we want to be the ones collaboratively telling the story.
Right.
And they also had D&D themed comics published by DC.
Oh.
Those were not successful either.
Oh.
For the same reasons you described.
Yeah.
They had this goose that laid golden eggs, right? They had this tabletop role-playing game that was very successful, a loving audience. D&D was becoming a household name. Mm-hmm. They ran this huge gaming convention called Gen Con, and you see this goose and you're like, maybe I should harvest the golden eggs from it and live off of those. Or you could say, maybe we can
hook the goose up to a plow and have it clear our driveway, right? Let's have it do unrelated tasks. So that's an absolutely incoherent metaphor. But like, you know, once again, this is this idea that, hey, you know, this started out as a hobby.
Right.
Now it's big business. Mm-hmm. And it's lost a lot of the original impetus and the original kind of plan, which was like sell people games that are fun to play.
Yeah. Well, they're just branching off into other mediums that are not their actual business model they're good at initially.
Yes.
Right. But that does happen with businesses, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, by the 90s, they're running into some difficulties. You know, they're in financial trouble. But at Gen Con, this big gaming convention that TSR owns in 1993, it's one of the first exhibitions of a game developed to play in the downtime at gaming conventions called Magic the Gathering. You know Magic the Gathering.
I do.
And so it wasn't the very first con at which anyone played Magic the Gathering, but Gen Con is such a big event that, you know, this was one of its like most visible outings yet, right? Mm-hmm. And I was kind of curious in putting together this episode, were people excited to see Magic at Gen Con 1993? So Dragons magazine has ads for this con.
Okay.
And so I tracked down an issue that advertised the full program for Gen Con 1993. It promotes George Takei as the guest of honor, a Ringworld themed video game.
Ooh.
Side note, that would later be called one of the worst video games ever made in some reviews. I've tried to play it. We'll add links in the show notes because it's like a DOS game you can play in your browser now.
Yeah, is it?
It's a point-and-click adventure about Ringworld.
Okay.
You know, Larry Niven, the Ringworld.
The Ringworld,
yeah. There was a whole Marvel mini-con within the con.
Okay.
You know, we talk about like, oh, these big businesses have recently gotten into cons and made them very different. 1993, there's already a Marvel mini-con at Gen Con.
1993 Marvel. Well, I guess that's like the comics boom of the 90s.
Exactly.
So they were doing well. Like, yeah.
They were thriving. And as you can probably guess, TSR's relationship with DC Comics that was making the D&D comics, that had ended pretty poorly. And so now they have Marvel at Gen Con. And so Magic the Gathering, we'll talk a lot about this next in the next Flashlight. It became like almost immediately a huge hit for the publisher, a small Seattle-based company called Wizards of the Coast.
Oh yeah, 206.
Yeah. By the mid 1990s, though, like TSR was like in pretty dire financial straits. They'd made some bets on games that just didn't pan out, and that happens. And they'd really always relied on these short-term lending arrangements for their capital needs, right?
Yeah.
They had these loans that they would get every year that prevented them from making any pivots during the year. The only way they could access more capital was to declare that they were going to print more of the books so that the bank would lend them more money at the beginning of the year. And, you know, at some point they're in like tens of millions of dollars of debt and no real way out. And when these lending arrangements eventually started to break down, Williams sold the company to Wizards of the Coast, the people who publish Magic. And Magic shows up at Gen Con in 1993. And by 1997, you know, Wizards of the Coast is big enough to buy TSR and buy Gen Con.
Wow.
Meteoric rise.
The next even more meteoric rise than
way more.
Yeah.
And we'll talk next Flashlight about why it was so fast.
Ooh, I'm excited.
It's kind of wild how quickly things accelerated for Wizards of the Coast in the 90s. People loved Dungeons and Dragons. They fucking could not get enough of Magic.
Yeah.
And anyway, so that sounds like it might be the end of TSR, but it wasn't. After the TSR trademark lapsed, right? Another company called TSR was spun up by one of the hosts of Roll for Initiative, which is a gaming podcast, one of the sons of Gary Gygax, and some other people involved with the old school revival movement that we talked about with Max last week. Yeah.
Okay, it's back.
Yeah. And pretty quickly, it turned out, we're not going to get into them here, but this like son of Gary Gygax that was involved with this had some reprehensible views, and we're not going to discuss them. But suffice to say, the other people involved in this project rebranded their efforts as Solarian Games. And Solarian Games is still publishing games today, and has a lot of these OSR people involved with it, and is trying to make these old school revival feeling games. The son of Gary Gygax continued calling his company TSR. They produced terrible games until they went bankrupt in 2023.
Okay, yeah.
And that's,
good riddance.
I mean, actually.
Son of Gary Gygax would be a good like heavy metal band name.
Had this son not existed, yes.
You said they're litigious, right? I can't. I'm just gonna
let's move on.
Sidestep that landmine.
Let's keep talking. Yeah. Honestly, getting sued would be great. A great flashlight concept for season 3. It's all just the courtroom situation.
Right. You've really made it once you get sued.
I mean, if I've learned anything from doing research for the flashlights this season, your hobby turns into a business the moment that there's torts and summons.
Right. And we can podcast from the
courtroom.
From the courtroom, yeah.
I mean, I don't know if we legally can, but
I want to get court artist pictures of us.
Oh, courtroom sketches.
Could we have we could ask the judge, can we like do a sidebar and then just
pose with our microphones
and record a little bit of content?
Oh, absolutely. While the artist sketches us.
Right. Yeah.
I can't wait to get sued.
Me neither. We should get a lawyer, probably. Let's get sued first.
Let's get sued first. Yeah. Or we can, maybe season 3 flashlights are all about us doing the bar exam.
Yeah, that sounds like fun.
Hey, they branched out into other entertainment. Why can't we?
You're absolutely right. We're going to stumble on a magic type situation at some point. Yeah.
Anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about the original Top Secret game, this one that ostensibly produced this FBI investigation at the TSR offices. And this is a game that had such realistic and grounded roleplay that it allegedly attracted the attention of the federal government.
Right.
So we are going to play as a couple rounds of it as opposing agents in a sword fight.
Opposing agents in a sword fight.
We're secret agents and we're having a sword fight. Yes.
And the FBI was concerned about this.
The FBI
do spies use swords? That's classified information.
Yeah, maybe they do. What's your spy's name?
My spy's name. I was gonna I want to say James Bond, but
come up with an original spy name.
James Gygax.
Oh, great. We're writing down character sheets, so you're gonna write down James Gygax as your character name. I was hoping for Monocle's McGillicuddy. I've missed him.
Monocle's McGillicuddy?
Absolutely. All right.
All right. I'm gonna land the airship.
Who are you a spy for?
What's the company? I fly Frontier Blimp Lines.
Yes.
Frontier Airship Lines. I'm a spy for Sky City.
All right, write that down. Your Monocle's McGillicuddy, a spy for
Sky City.
A spy for Sky City. An easy thing to say that is not confusing whatsoever. I will play as I will play as Dentat Sanguinoff, who is, I'm trying to think of what's the opposite of a sky city. It's an underground city. Dentat Sanguinoff is a vampire.
Okay.
And we are in a sword fight. And we're going to use this aboard an airship.
We're aboard an airship?
Absolutely.
All right. Are we aboard my airship? Or are you invading my airship? Reilly's holding a sword for real now. Let the record show.
I think we got to use the prop.
Of course.
Prop comedy. You're spying on my airship, aren't you?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
I'm trying to do some nefarious vampire activities.
Okay. I caught you snooping around behind the door that says employees only.
Absolutely that. And I turn around and we're going to get into combat. So the way it works is I'm going to say that we both have 15 life points.
15 life points.
And so write down that you start with 15. The art for this game is phenomenal.
There is a guy jump kicking another dude who looks straight out of the 70s right in the face over a damsel in distress.
Who has, yeah.
Yeah. Looks like he was trying to rob her.
I'm fascinated by like the non-Euclidean nature of the geometry. Everything is the same distance away in that picture, in that tableau. So here's how it's going to work. Write down that you have 15 life points. On each move, we can choose up to 2 actions from this sword play table.
2 actions from a sword play table. Okay.
Right. So we can make attacks like stab to head or cut to torso.
Stab to hell.
And then defense actions like parry, up sweep, down sweep, or my favorite, none. And then each pair of our actions, we each do 2 actions. Each of the 2 pairs of our actions, we refer to one of several tables and roll a D100 to see how much damage it does. They hadn't quite worked out how to make combat smooth in this era, so we have like, I think 6 different tables we'll have to refer to and roll a D100 on them to figure out how much damage happens. I'm going to have you write down what 2 attacks you're going to make in the first round.
And we only have 15 life points?
We only have 15 life points.
And we're rolling D100s for the table?
On the
lookups?
table.
Okay.
And some of the lookup tables, these will be 1-hit kills. But, you know, that's combat in this game. Yeah. It is clunky. So I'm going to have you write down, we'll both write down what we're doing in round 1.
Okay.
And then we will reveal and we will...
Okay. Do I do 1 attack?
So you can do up to 2 attacks or up to 2 defense for a total of 2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you either do 1 or 2 of both of them, and then we're gonna play until one of us dies, because either Monocle's McGillicuddy is winning this fight or Dentat Sanguinov.
Right.
All right. Are you ready?
Yeah.
So what do you do in round 1?
Round 1, I am stabbing to leg.
I didn't stab to head. So I guess I guess I see how that works. Like, you're going down to stab Dentat's leg, and Dentat is stabbing you down into the head. Cool. So let's resolve the damage. And this is a different way than what we're used to for damage dice. So let's resolve you stabbing the leg first. Because that's a leg stab with none defense, we're going to roll on table W. Could you please roll a D100 on table W?
Okay, I got this is the D100.
Yes, it takes a long time to roll, and it sounds terrible on a microphone.
God. 59.
59, you do 3 points of damage. So, you've hit me. I'm a vampire.
Take this.
Meanwhile, I'm stabbing you in the head while you're stabbing me in the leg. So that's a head stab with none damage. We'll roll on table Y. This dice is just the best audio. Oh, shit. It's rolling everywhere. What did it come out to?
It came out to 57.
Wow.
Is that a 1 or a 7?
That is definitely a 1. It doesn't matter either way. Severe damage. You take 8 points of damage as you get stabbed in the head in that first round.
Does my monocle count as defense?
Your monocle just plinks out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you've really done it.
Well, that's our first attack.
All right.
For our second thrilling attack, what did you choose for the second one?
I chose stab other leg.
Classic. When you're fighting a vampire, go for the leg sweep. So mark down that you took 8 points of damage. So you're down to 7 life points. I have 12. I'm healthy as hell. I did parry.
Oh, fuck.
So stab to leg plus parry. We're gonna roll on table V. So if you could roll on table V to see how much damage you did to Dentat Sanguinov.
That is an 81.
2 points. So you you really taken out Dentat's legs, but you're like stabbed through the head and bleeding really hard. This again, the hyper realistic game attracted the attention of the FBI. Let's do another round of combat. So here again is that list of stabs and cuts you can make. You can also do parries, up sweeps, or down sweeps. I don't know what those mean. And we'll go from there. There's also same side and other side, whether we're doing the left or the right. Gonna be honest with you, we're just going to ignore that entirely.
Okay.
Unless you want to. Does that sound fun to choose which arm we're using?
Which arm we're using?
Yes.
I mean, why not?
Okay, cool. I would like you to this time decide whether your defensive actions, if you take any, are left-handed or right-handed.
Okay.
Actually, attacks and defense are left-handed or right-handed. This is how combat worked before people really settled on the AC to hit and then you roll damage dice. We're just going to do this simultaneously. So let's specify what arm we're doing everything with as we do it. This is the worst game. Now, the concept of a meta hadn't really been invented yet, which is why we can just do these isolated encounters, but I will point out that there's very little incentive to do defensive moves in this game. You really do better if you just stab. Are you ready to go?
Okay.
And specify whether you're using your left hand or right hand.
Okay, left hand cut to torso.
All right, I did left hand stab to head. So we don't defend. Do you want to resolve your left hand cut to torso first? That's going to be table Y. So if you could roll on that damage table a D100.
I got a 78.
Oh my gosh, severe damage. I take 9 points of damage from the cut to torso. I'm gonna go to my move 1 was the good old reliable stab to head.
Yeah.
This one with my left hand. That's also gonna be table Y.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna roll a D100 to see if I can stab you in the head again, I guess. If you could catch that D100 before it rolls off, thank you. What did that land on?
52.
I'm afraid that's 8 points of damage to Monocle's McGillicuddy. How many life points did you have?
I had 7.
Monocles, I'm so sorry. This is the end of your story. In this hyper-realistic spy drama, you died of stab to head times 2. But you know what? That is actually pretty realistic, I think, if you stab most people to the head. So, could be worse. Anyway, that's how one plays combat, or sword combat in particular, in Top Secret. Which is genuinely, I think, a fun game.
That's kind of fun.
Yeah. And it really, I think playing games of this era really make me appreciate how thoughtful modern combat mechanics can be. Because that felt quite clunky. Anyway.
You haven't seen the last of Monocle's McGillicuddy.
Are you like strapping on your parachute while bleeding heavily from the head and jumping out of the airship? That's what I'm imagining.
Yeah,
right
I
now.
still got my legs. They're great. You can't chase me.
All right, Dentov Sanguinoff scuttles off into the shadows.
I hit the emergency The emergency kill the engines. Kill the how do blimps fly? Or
They gotta have propellers of some kind.
Yeah. I'm gonna throw a wrench into the propellers.
Oh shit!
Take the last parachute and go.
I mean, you might win this one. You have no life points. You are bleeding, but you're taking monocles down with, or taking Dentat down with you.
Down.
Well, I hope the passengers also have parachutes.
Oh no! All the passengers.
I mean, it's a Spirit Airlines blimp, right?
Yeah, parachutes are extra. Those are add-ons. Nobody buys those.
Oh shoot. Well, this is grim. Anyway, given everything that happened with TSR, between these successive corporate takeovers, these exotic financing arrangements, the constant lawsuits, the fact that the company survived, made this popular game, and eventually got taken over, it really is a testament to how much people liked playing TTRPGs and how much the ideas coming out of this game development company were fun and innovative and a product people wanted to buy. Even as we discussed last time, to the point where they depleted the supply of dice so much that you got little cardboard pieces to draw out of a bag. Right? Like, that's kind of remarkable that everything going on, they still made a product that people really liked and made a game that I think had a pretty big influence on tabletop gaming and hobbies, kind of hobby-based businesses in general. It started out as passionate fans and then eventually became a big company that was very determined to branch off into new revenue corridors. Speaking of which, we'll explore Wizards of the Coast and their eventual fate in the next episode.
And that's all for this week.
I'm Dungeon Inspector Jake.
And I'm Production Master Reilly.
If you're enjoying the show, subscribe and leave a review.
It helps other people find the show.
And also prevents your party from being cursed with intractable scheduling issues.
For more on the show, including links to all our social media, visit folderfrequencies.com/campaign spotlight.